Hello, today's video is going to look at a poem that celebrates a woman's beauty. Now this is a poem, She Walks in Beauty by Lord Byron, that really agitates some of the intelligent, articulate female colleagues that I work with, because not unreasonably they see this poem as suggesting that a key measure of a woman's value on this planet is determined by how attractive she is to the male eyeball. Anyway, regardless of the poem's chauvinistic posturings, this video is going to look at the poet's use of language and structure, look at a few contextual elements as well. Then we're going to marry it all together and produce exam paragraphs that would eclipse anyone in terms of their poise and beauty. Now I'll warn you in advance, this next bit contains a bit of singing. This is the overview of the poem, the bare bones if you will. And there's a line in a song called The Girl from Ipanema. If you haven't heard of it, trust me, your dad has. And this chap talks about a woman, he says, and when she passes, each man she passes goes, ah. And we got a similar deal in this poem. Over 3 stanzas, we got the narrator attempting to describe the immensity, the intensity of this woman's beauty. And keeping to this very rigid rhyme scheme, the poet says that this woman's physical attractiveness is flawless, it is without error. As the poem goes on, the narrator makes the inference that this external beauty is a reflection, an index, a measure of her inner goodness, her inner beauty. So there's the poem in a nutshell, accompanied by a line of Z-grade singing. Now we know what the poem's about, let's start dipping into it and winkling out some language techniques, some structural techniques. We'll start with simile, which is of course a language technique. First lines, in fact. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies. So we're going to analyse this now, see what we can do with this little doohickey. Well, the first thing we can do with this simile is suggest that it captures the scale or the depth of her beauty. Like the night, there's something boundless, immense, fathomless about the night. It seems to go on forever. That's mirroring the intensity, the depth of her beauty. Also, you've got the idea that perhaps by linking to the night, she's got a kind of dark or dusky complexion too. Probably a brunette he's talking about. But we don't have to stop there. As Mr. Taylor's oh so hilarious picture suggests, we can drill down deeper into this image. We can tease out more meaning from these lines. Because we can see enjambement, a structural device in these 2 lines. You'll notice like the night, slash of cloudless climes. That slash just denotes where the line break of the poem goes. And you'll notice there's no punctuation. That's called enjambement. When one line links onto the other, we know punctuation to slow it down. It creates pace. Why is the poet doing that here? Well, it's creating this breathless tone that kind of captures the intensity of his feelings, the excitement and passion that he feels on gazing on her. But we don't have to stop there. No siree. We can be a real clever Trevor and pull something else out. We've got a plosive sound here. Plosives are spitting sounds like b and t and f. You've got the cloudless climbs. And what that C sound is bringing, what that k sound is bringing to the party is, again, that sense of the passionate feelings underpinning his experience of this woman's beauty. Maybe you could also say that the adjective cloudless refers to her flawless beauty as well. In all then, those first 2 lines are like a piñata. I mean, we've hit them with our analytical stick and all sorts of colourful interpretations have spilled out. Any 2 of those stitched into an exam response is going to make the examiner a very happy camper. We'll whip through this second bit of language analysis very quickly. You've got some religious imagery peppered throughout this poem. You've got the word heaven and the word grace. These words, of course, are drawn from the Christian religion, hence my daughter's beautiful picture on the left of a church. It's rather galling for me that even at 7 years old, she's a better artist than her old man. But I digress. Well, what's going on here? Why use these religious images in a poem about a beautiful woman? Well, what it's doing, of course, is by linking or juxtaposing the beauty with religious imagery, it's suggesting that this woman is so beautiful that she's almost a thing of worship. She's almost like a goddess, soaring above, miles beyond, miles above mere mortals. A bit like the night imagery, it's a measure of the intensity, the scale of her beauty. Another interpretation for this religious imagery is it's helping to convey the poet's purity of feelings towards this woman. He's trying to convey and imply that, his feelings towards this woman aren't characterised by anything sordid or lusty. This is a kind of a reverence bordering on religious worship. Almost like he's saying, well, I fancy you, but, in a respectful way. Which is a bit of a joke if you know anything about Lord Byron, who was a bit of a wild man, was our Byron. You really had to lock up your daughters when he was in town. So the idea of him talking about pure feelings is a bit rich, really. Especially when you remember that he was famously summed up by one ex-girlfriend as mad, bad and dangerous to know. Having looked at language, we'll now direct our attention to structure, because that joyless jobs with the examiner will crucify you if you fail to look at a structural feature like rhyme or enjambment or sentence length or whatever. Here we're going to look at the significance of the meaning of the poem's fixed AB rhyme scheme. Because there's a reason Byron used that. He wasn't just doing it for poops and giggles. What he's trying to convey is, through the regularity of the poem's structure, that's like a reflection or a mirroring of the kind of even, ordered, regular features. I mean, Mr. Taylor's nose, it's all awkward angles. It's like a wad of putty. I mean, you'd probably use free verse if you were trying to describe it. But of course, to convey the symmetry, the harmony of this woman's appearance, a fixed rhyme scheme helps to facilitate that. The final bit of structure that we'll look at is repetition. We'll have a quick nose at this easy win. Third stanza, he's describing her smile and her complexion, and he talks about her being so soft, so calm. What's this do? Well, it just serves to emphasise the extent of her delicacy and her poise and her grace. If we've got a secondary interpretation, we can maybe look at that alliteration, or sibilance, which is the posh term for the alliteration of S. That sibilance, so and so, is perhaps capturing the sense of awe, almost like he's sighing as he gazes on her dazzling, radiant beauty. I must confess to doing something similar when I'm looking at myself in the mirror. Right then, so we've considered the poet's craft. We've looked at how the poet shapes or creates meaning from the words and the layout of those words on the page, the language or the structure. Now we're going to focus on contextual ideas, relevant contextual ideas that we can link to the poem. Now I would argue, being the psychotically ambitious teacher that I am, always pushing students towards those highest grades, that you can link She Walks in Beauty to the shallow or the superficial values of the era it was written in. An era that prized or privileged or admired beauty above all other qualities in people. Now you could argue that this superficial obsession with appearances pervades our society today. I mean, open any newspaper, a tabloid newspaper, and it's crammed full, isn't it, with the lives and loves of the pretty and the vapid. Never mind newspapers, open a comic book, a fairy tale, a Bond novel, and you will see pretty people perceived as good. In contrast, the villains are often physically flawed in some way. A lot of Bond villains have some sort of deformity. Fairy tales, comic books, Bond novels, then basically from the cradle were conditioned to start seeing good as synonymous, as linked with physical attraction, and badness as linked with ugliness. I mean, it's no coincidence that the word fair has two meanings. Fair can mean pretty, it can also mean just or good. And Byron is clearly a product of his time. This poem written in the 19th century reflects that obsession with appearances and that assumption that beauty reflects some sort of innate inner goodness or beauty too. In fact, one way of reading Frankenstein, that fantastic novel by Mary Shelley, written around the same time that Byron was writing, you can see Frankenstein as a criticism, as an indictment of a society that bases its judgment on you, on your physical appearance. The final contextual link that will forge between the poem and the era it was written is the idea of the Enlightenment. This was a time in the 18th and 19th century when we're seeing religious influence in people's lives being weakened and science very much in the ascendancy. Science beginning to explain things that were traditionally attributed to God. And we can see Byron's poem, She Walks in Beauty, as a reaction against the Enlightenment. Not because the poem is particularly religious or anything like that, but more because this poem is foregrounding human experience, feelings, the sensations of gazing on that dazzling, awe-inspiring beauty. This can be seen as a reaction to the emotional sterility, the human coldness that was arguably ushered in on the back end of the Enlightenment. So this is, in a sense, is kind of challenging science and foregrounding the senses again, putting human sensations, human experiences above and beyond cold rational thought and science. Well, I've thrown a lot of high-level ideas at you, the last 10 minutes. So let's just take a second to lick our wounds, collect our thoughts, and think about turning some of this theory, this high-level theory, into practice. Locking these ideas down on paper as polished, professional, examiner-pleasing paragraphs. Now, what you're seeing on the screen right now is the layout for the edXL exam board anthology poetry question. Compare how, whatever the theme is presented in She Walks in Beauty on one of the poem. So they'll name a poem and give you the choice of looking at whatever the poem in the cluster you fancy. The stuff in red is the stuff that you've got to do in the exam. Now, I doubt they'll call you a proper divvy, I admit that's me paraphrasing, but you have to look at the poem's use of language and structure. As I said before, if you just look at one, structure rather than language, or language rather than structure, you're snookered. Your exam result is going to go into freefall. You must look at both. You must also look at those relevant contextual factors, such as those ones we've looked at in this video, the Enlightenment and the shallow values of the 19th century. And I've cut and pasted in a theme here, which I found in an old specimen paper, so it's very much the kind of thing you might find yourself going toe-to-toe with in the exam hall. Next step then, take some of the ideas from this video on the right use of craft, language and structure, those contextual factors, and try and weave it into an exam response. Brace yourself then for some jazzy paragraphs positively bristling with razzle-dazzle. Let us now consider the effect of love in She Walks in Beauty. Here are two paragraphs then that I cranked out on the back end of that question. I'll read them through and then we can consider why they're so effective. In She Walks in Beauty, Byron uses religious imagery to present the effect of love. The poem includes references to heaven and grace. This serves to compellingly convey to the reader that the woman's beauty affects the narrator so much that he perceived it as something worthy of worship, as if she were a goddess or a deity. Interestingly, by juxtaposing beauty and religion, Byron seems to glorify or validate the shallow values of 19th century society, where physical attractiveness was privileged above other personal characteristics. It is these superficial values that novels like Frankenstein sought to criticise. So why are these paragraphs so beautiful that if Byron was alive today, he'd probably write a poem about them? Well, let's look at that first line first, our point. We've got that reference to religious imagery. Don't forget the question asked how, and how refers to the language and the structural techniques, in this case, language, imagery. Present and effects of love are also key words from the question. This is ensuring that my response is task-focused. I'm actually answering the question that was set. In the point, I talked about the poem using religious imagery. Well, here is the evidence backing up that assertion. Those references to heaven and grace, that's your religious imagery. Hopefully, all students studying for the edXL examination board know that the examiner loves it when you can use evaluative words like compellingly or engagingly or successfully. Convey is like highlight or imply. It's a nice verb to launch into my explanation, and apparently it's vital in these paragraphs that you talk about the effect on the reader. Just in case we thought the effect was on the dust mites or the pigeons, we have to specify. No, the effect is on the reader. It's pointless, but it's what the examiner wants. The word affects links to the question which talked about the effects of love. This beauty affects or has the effect on the narrator of. And finally, there's the explanation for that religious imagery. It just suggests the woman is so beautiful that it's almost worthy of worship. Jump into the relevant contextual link now. I've simply said that obsession with beauty reflects those shallow values of the 19th century, where, physical attractiveness was lionised, was admired above all other personal characteristics. And then I've developed that just with a nod to the novel Frankenstein, which criticised that worldview or attitude. You probably noticed that Mr. Taylor is not much of a lad for false modesty. These paragraphs are fantastic, what can I say? You use something like this in the exam, you're going to absolutely smash it. Another quick shufty at the question, because of course this is a comparative response that we're writing. The clues in the first word, we're linking to another poem from the cluster of our choice. I'm going to briefly roll out, I won't bother explaining it, I'm going to briefly roll out a model comparative paragraph looking at the poem One Flesh. Oh, I lied. I'm told men are always doing that. It's not One Flesh, it's neutral tones that I'm looking at here in comparison with She Walks in Beauty. Have a read at this at your leisure. This is how you do the comparative paragraph. You don't have to put as much emphasis and detail into it. I've probably gone a bit overboard with my deep developed explanation here. I'll just tonk this in as a bonus. It's 2 more paragraphs in response to the question. You'll be relieved to hear that I won't bother reading these out. As I always say, read them at your leisure. Bless your heart for all the positive feedback you've been leaving me, all those good people who've been buying my book. This book does offer up some divine, sublime tricks for tweaking your writing. And for the price of a pickled egg, well, you can't fault that. It will certainly inject some flair into your work, the sort of flair that is so beloved by examiners. Conclusions, 4 paragraphs here summing up the fruits of our labours. Read it at your leisure. And we're free to leave. No charges will be made against us. She walks in beauty, analysed, well, beautifully. As they say in Spain and in the Terminator, hasta la vista.